Throughout the Left 4 Dead games, you're greeted with some truly terrifying special infected. On display is the full ungodly transformative power of the Green Flu. The smoker was once a normal man, now covered with tumors the size of its head, tongue drooping from its mouth. On display the decomposed, elongated flesh that forms its ensnaring tool. Today we're talking about the smoker from Left 4 Dead. You guys made it overwhelmingly clear to me that you prefer the slightly longer format, so count this as a return to form of sorts. The smoker appears as a tall, slim figure around 7 feet in height, constantly coughing and expelling clouds of assumably nauseous gas. His face and arms are overtaken with massive hulking tumors, consuming an entire side of his body. His mouth, forced open by the parasitic masses overtaking his body, has a protruding fleshy appendage that we are led to believe is his highly mutated tongue, now a lasso of sorts to trap survivors and literally squeeze the life out of them. He's a grim reminder that sometimes the Green Flu mutates your body even without necessarily desirable traits. But how does someone become the smoker? We aren't given much in the way of identifying what specifically leads to the creation of the smoker, but as its name and overwhelming amount of assumably cancerous tumors suggest, someone would need to have a high chance of cancer in their genetic pool, or at the very least a very high prevalence of carcinogens in their body. Carcinogens being chemicals that attribute to a higher rate for cancer, like over 69 of the chemicals in each cigarette. But there's more to the story. In the United States, where Left 4 Dead takes place, we're also exposed to carcinogens in a variety of ways, such as alcohol usage and even the consumption of some types of highly processed foods. The Green Flu has an almost calculated methodology to its transformations, as it could simply amplify anyone's genetic predisposition to cancer, but for some reason it only chooses a small portion of the infected. The smoker is constantly heard choking on its own gases, likely unable to breathe effectively through the masses growing around its neck, arms, and face. This detail adds another layer of horror to the creature, as it suffers from its own mutations while remaining a deadly threat to survivors. Where does the smoker fit into the Green Flu's strategy of infection? If the tank is the bulldozer to knock down humanity's defenses, and the boomer is a walking rallying call for the infected, then the smoker is the special infected designed to separate even the most coordinated survivor teams. He may not be the strongest, coming in at a relatively low 250 health. He isn't a bullet sponge, but he is a survivor magnet. The smoker's primary strength is his ability to discreetly drag survivors away from their team, isolating them in the process. Pairing him with a well-placed boomer creates an incredible combination. When the smoker wraps his tongue around a survivor, he can actually pull them to the ground before dragging them off. Alone, it's not the most deadly special infected ability, but when combined with the blurry screen effect from the boomer, it's easy to lose track of your teammates as they're pulled away to their untimely fate. He also seems to have a fairly high cognitive ability when put in comparison to other special infected. The tank is seen more as a brute strength monster that runs directly to its targets, whereas when the smoker is shot at or has its tongue temporarily destroyed, it will often retreat to an area where it can recover before attempting to ensnare another survivor. In Versus mode, there are multiple locations where the smoker can pull survivors off of ledges or things like escalators, leaving them in an incapacitated, hanging state. This is an excellent way to stop a team's momentum. If anyone's run into me in Versus, you know I'm horrible with the smoker, but any experienced smoker player can be a real menace to a team's momentum. The smoker's damage stats aren't particularly impressive. His claws deal 4 damage per hit, and while his primary ability is more about slowing down survivors and providing common infected with a defenseless target, the real power comes in his ability to disrupt and isolate. By dragging survivors into dangerous situations, like pulling them toward hazards, the smoker can amplify his impact far beyond simple damage. For example, he can use environmental hazards or even other infected to deal additional damage or force survivors into risky situations. Using the smoker, you can drag survivors into specific angles where another infected, such as a charger, is able to take that survivor from you and possibly insta-kill them. It leads to some great synchronization. His ability to pull victims into danger is what truly makes him a threat. I wouldn't say the smoker is always a massive playmaker, as he's heavily reliant on coordination with your teammates. His tongue can be destroyed while it's dragging survivors in several ways, whether you shoot the tongue, shove the ensnared survivor, or target the smoker himself. The tongue leaves a clear trail right back to the smoker, making him vulnerable to attack. If you're the one ensnared, you can even use a melee weapon to cut the tongue free, escaping without the help of your teammates. But for those moments when the smoker does succeed in isolating a survivor, the damage dealt can vary greatly depending on the difficulty. On easy, the smoker deals 10 damage per hit on ensnared survivors and takes 3 seconds to react before attempting to ensnare one. This reaction time resets if the smoker moves or stays out of sight for more than 5 seconds. On normal, the damage remains 10 per hit on ensnared survivors, with claw attacks dealing 2 damage each, or 4 per claw, and 3 while dragging in versus. The reaction time is faster at 1.5 seconds. On advanced, the smoker's damage ramps up to 20 per hit on ensnared survivors, and 5 per claw. And finally, on expert, the smoker becomes a devastating threat, dealing 30 damage per hit on ensnared survivors and 20 per claw, killing a full health survivor in just 8 seconds. This versatility in damage reinforces the smoker's role as a disruptor. While he may not be as resilient or flashy as other special infected, his ability to isolate survivors and amplify the chaos of an encounter makes him an essential part of the Green Flu's strategy. This reliance on teamwork highlights the smoker's unique niche. He's not about brute force but disruption and isolation. His power lies in separating survivors, pulling them into danger, and creating chaos. It's this ability to dismantle teams that makes him a strategic, if not always direct threat. Though he might not deal the most damage overall, his true strength lies in opening the door for other infected to strike. So whether you're facing off against the smoker or using him to wreak havoc, his influence on the battlefield is undeniable. He's the master of pulling survivors apart, piece by piece, one dragged victim at a time. The smoker we know today has cemented his place as one of the most unique special infected in Left 4 Dead. But like most great creations, the smoker went through some pretty interesting iterations during development, many of which didn't make the final cut. Initially, the smoker was designed to be even more of a stealthy disruptor. His original purpose was to sneak up on survivors, engulf them in a cloud of pitch black smoke, seize one, and disappear, leaving their teammates scrambling to find them. Imagine how terrifying that would have been, more like a horror movie villain than the team disruptor we have now. In early builds, the smoker had the ability to release his smoke whenever he wanted, and if survivors were nearby, the smoke would push them back, almost like a boomer's explosion. Not only that, but the smoke itself could injure survivors on contact, acting more like a spitter's acid pool. This would have made him far deadlier in close quarters, and much harder to deal with in tight maps like No Mercy. His tongue mechanics were also quite different. In pre-release footage, the smoker's tongue would wrap around the victim's neck, not their torso, and pull them at a much faster rate. Survivors could still fire at the smoker while being dragged, but the speed would have made it much more difficult to line up a shot. Interestingly, the tongue couldn't lift survivors off the ground if the smoker was above them, making vertical pulls impossible in the early designs of the game. Another scrapped feature was the ability for the smoker to release his victim voluntarily, either by using a secondary fire or turning away mid-pull. This would have allowed for more strategic gameplay like pulling someone into a hazard and then retreating to safety. While this ability was removed, you can still enable it in the game using the console command tongue_allow_voluntary_release space 1. Be warned though, this might crash your game. Even the smoker's appearance was very different in earlier builds. His model lacked the iconic tongue hanging from his mouth, and he was actually shorter, about the same height as the survivors, if not slightly shorter. The smaller stature combined with his smoke abilities would have made him even harder to spot in the chaos. Sound design also went through changes. The smoker had a completely different alert and warning sound in pre-release footage, which gave him a distinct identity during development. Reflecting on these cut features, it's fascinating to imagine how differently the smoker would have played if these ideas had stayed in the final game. Some of these mechanics, like the damaging smoke or the faster tongue drag, might have made him too overpowered, while others, like the ability to release a victim, could have added an interesting layer of strategy to his role. Ultimately, the smoker we ended up with strikes a balance between chaos and strategy, but knowing how close we were to a very different kind of infected shows just how much thought went into crafting Left 4 Dead's iconic special infected. And there you have it, an in-depth look at the Smoker, one of the most disruptive and fascinating special infected in Left 4 Dead. From his role in the Green Flu's grand strategy, to his unique mechanics, and even the scrapped content that could have made him a completely different threat, the Smoker proves that even the subtlest infected can leave a massive impact on survivor teams. What do you think about the Smoker? Is he one of your favorites to play in versus, or do you find him more of a challenge to deal with as a survivor? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more infected deep dives, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Next time we'll be exploring another one of the Green Flu's terrifying creations, so make sure you hit that notification bell to stay updated. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there, or maybe just watch your back.